The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers for the third time tonight, clattering against the concrete like my marriage hitting rock bottom. I was under my beat-up Ford pickup at 11:30 on a Tuesday, because apparently that's what passes for excitement in my life these days. The transmission was leaking again, which seemed fitting since everything else around here was falling apart too. "Danny, you're such a simple-minded fool," came Amelia's voice from our kitchen window, drifting across the driveway like poison in the night air. "He has no idea what real ambition looks like." I froze under the truck, my heart doing that thing where it forgets how to beat properly. My wife of 12 years was on the phone at nearly midnight, and she sure as hell wasn't talking to her mother. "Dean, you know I can't just leave yet," she continued, her voice taking on that sultry tone I hadn't heard directed at me in months. "I need to be strategic about this. Danny's construction business is worth more than he realizes, and I've put too much work into building my reputation to throw it away for a messy divorce." Dean. That would be Dean Morrison, her business partner at Coastal Architectural Design. The same Dean who'd been coming around for project meetings that seemed to require an awful lot of wine and closed doors. The same Dean who drove a BMW that cost more than most people's houses and wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "I know, baby, I know," Amelia purred into the phone. "Just give me a few more weeks to get everything in place." Danny's so focused on his little blue-collar world, he doesn't even notice what's happening right under his nose. Well, wasn't that just peachy? Here I was, literally under something, listening to my wife plan my financial execution with her lover. The irony was so thick you could cut it with the very wrench that kept slipping from my suddenly numb fingers. I slid out from under the truck as quietly as possible, my work clothes now decorated with oil stains that seemed appropriate for the occasion. Through the kitchen window, I could see Amelia pacing back and forth, her blonde hair catching the overhead light as she gestured animatedly into her phone. She was wearing the red silk nightgown I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. Apparently, it was getting more use than I'd realized, just not with me. "The cabin this weekend will be perfect," she was saying. "Danny thinks I'm at that conference in Portland." God, he's so trusting, it's almost pathetic. Almost pathetic. Almost. Well, that was something, I supposed. I crept closer to the house, staying in the shadows cast by our neighbor's overgrown hedge. Mrs. Peterson's television was blaring some late-night infomercial about miracle cleaning products, which provided perfect cover for my impromptu surveillance mission. "You should see him, Dean," Amelia continued, her voice dripping with contempt. "He comes home every day covered in sawdust and dirt, talking about his crew and his projects like he's building the pyramids instead of just another strip mall. He has no vision, no class, no understanding of what success really means. No vision. That was rich, coming from someone whose biggest architectural achievement was designing a Starbucks that looked exactly like every other Starbucks in America. "I can't wait to be done with all this," she said, her voice softening into what I used to think was her loving tone. Now it just sounded calculating. "Once we get the Morrison Hayes firm established and I get my settlement from Danny, we can finally start our real life together." Morrison Hayes. She was already planning to hyphenate with her lover's name. How wonderfully efficient of her. I stood there in my own driveway feeling like a stranger in my own life. 12 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to. My wife was planning her escape route while I was literally trying to fix the leaks in my truck. The metaphor was so obvious, it was almost insulting. The phone call ended, and I heard Amelia's footsteps heading toward the stairs. I had maybe 30 seconds to get back under the truck and pretend I'd heard nothing. But as I dropped to the ground and slid back into position, my mind was already working on a different kind of problem. See, here's the thing about being in construction for 15 years. You learn how to build things, but you also learn how to tear them down. You learn about foundations and weak points, about leverage and pressure, about timing and precision. And most importantly, you learn that the most devastating collapses always start with the smallest cracks. Amelia thought I was simple-minded. Dean thought I was beneath their notice. They were about to learn that underestimating a blue-collar man with nothing left to lose was the kind of mistake that could bring down a lot more than just a marriage. I lay there under my truck, staring up at the rusted metal and thinking about revenge. Not the impulsive, reckless kind that lands you in jail. The cold, calculated kind that leaves your enemies standing in the wreckage of their own actions, wondering how the hell they got there. By the time I crawled out from under that truck, I wasn't the same man who'd gone under it. That guy was trusting, loving, maybe even a little naive. This guy? This guy was going to show my cheating wife and her trust fund boyfriend what real ambition looked like. The transmission could wait. I had some blueprints to draw up. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Amelia humming in the kitchen. She was in full performance mode, playing the role of devoted wife with an enthusiasm that would have been touching if I didn't know it was complete bullshit. "Morning, honey," she said brightly as I stumbled downstairs, still playing the part of the oblivious husband. "I made your favorite breakfast." She had indeed made pancakes, bacon, and eggs. The same breakfast she'd been making every Tuesday for the past 6 months, ever since her Tuesday night phone conferences had started. Guilt breakfast, I realized now. She was feeding me comfort food to assuage her conscience about planning my destruction. "Thanks, babe," I said, settling into my usual chair at our small kitchen table. "You're up early." "Big day at the office," she replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Dean and I have that presentation for the Riverside Development Project." Dean and I. She said his name like it tasted good. "Sounds important," I said, around a mouthful of pancake. "When do you think you'll be home?" "Oh, probably late. You know how these client dinners go. I knew exactly how they went, apparently, just not the way I'd thought I knew." "Well, don't work too hard," I said, standing up to give her a kiss on the cheek. She tensed slightly at the contact, which was interesting. Guilty conscience? Or was she already mentally checking out of our marriage? "I should get going too," I added. "Rick's expecting me at the site by 7. Rick Kowalski was my foreman and oldest friend, a guy I'd known since high school who could build anything and had opinions about everything. If anyone would have practical advice about my situation, it would be Rick. I grabbed my thermos of coffee and headed out to my truck, which was still sitting in the driveway with its transmission problems. But that was okay. Today, I was taking Amelia's car to work. She wouldn't need it after all, since Dean would probably be picking her up for their business meetings. Coastal Construction's main office was a double-wide trailer parked on a lot next to the harbor, surrounded by equipment, materials, and the controlled chaos of an active construction business. It wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, built from nothing over the past 8 years. Amelia was wrong about one thing. I did understand what success meant. I just defined it differently than she did. Rick was already there when I arrived, standing next to a stack of lumber and arguing with our supplier about delivery schedules. He was a big guy, 6'4", and built like the former linebacker he was, with graying hair and hands that could crush beer cans or handle delicate electrical work with equal skill. "Danny," he called out when he saw me. Perfect timing. "Tommy here thinks he can charge us extra for weekend delivery." I spent the next 20 minutes negotiating with Tommy, using the kind of practical problem-solving skills that apparently made me simple-minded in my wife's eyes. By the time we were done, we'd not only avoided the extra charges but gotten a discount on our next order. "Nice work," Rick said as Tommy drove away. "You look like hell, though. Everything okay at home?" This was my opening. Rick and I had been through a lot together over the years. He'd been the best man at my wedding, had helped me start the business, and had never once judged me for choosing to work with my hands instead of my college degree in architecture. "Actually, no," I said. "Can we talk privately?" We walked into the trailer where Rick poured 2 cups of coffee from the perpetually brewing pot in the corner. The office was cramped but functional, with blueprints tacked to every available wall surface and invoices organized in a system that made sense only to us. "What's going on?" Rick asked, settling his bulk into the chair behind his desk. I told him everything, The phone call, the lies, the weekend trips, the whole sordid situation. Rick listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Son of a bastard," he said when I finished. "I never liked that guy. Too smooth, you know? Like a used car salesman in an expensive suit." "The question is, what do I do about it?" I asked. Rick was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup like it held the answers to life's great mysteries. "You could confront her," he said finally. "Have it out. Try to work things through." "And if she denies it? If she's better at lying than I thought? Then you get proof. Real proof. The kind that holds up in divorce court." That was the practical answer, and probably the smart one. But something inside me was pushing for a different approach. Something that wanted to see Amelia and Dean face consequences that went beyond just legal proceedings. "There's another option," Rick continued, reading my expression. "You could make them pay in other ways. Reputation, business relationships, social standing. Hit them where it really hurts." "That sounds like you're speaking from experience." Rick's smile was grim. "My ex-wife tried to take me for everything I had. Thought I was too stupid to fight back. She learned different. I'd heard bits and pieces of Rick's divorce story over the years, but never the full details. Now I was curious." "What did you do?" "Nothing illegal," he said quickly. "But I made sure everyone in town knew exactly what kind of person she was." Amazing how fast people's attitudes change when they learn the truth about someone. The truth. That was the key, wasn't it? Amelia and Dean were living a lie, counting on my ignorance to keep their secret safe. But what if their secret wasn't safe? What if everyone in their professional and social circles knew exactly what they were doing? "I need to think about this," I said. "Take your time," Rick replied. "But don't take too long. The longer you wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks." I spent the rest of the day working on the Riverside project, ironically, the same development that Amelia and Dean were supposedly presenting to clients. It was a mixed-use complex that would bring jobs and revenue to our struggling waterfront district, the kind of project that required both architectural vision and construction expertise. As I worked, I found myself thinking about foundations again. Every building started with a foundation, and if that foundation was compromised, everything built on top of it would eventually collapse. Amelia and Dean had built their relationship on lies and betrayal. All I had to do was expose those lies, and their foundation would crumble. By the time I headed home that evening, I had the beginnings of a plan. Amelia came home at 10:30 that night, smelling like expensive wine and Dean's cologne. She'd changed clothes since morning, I noticed, and her hair had that carefully arranged, casual look that actually took a lot of effort to achieve. "How was the presentation?" I asked from the couch, where I'd been pretending to watch television while actually planning her downfall. "Oh, it went really well," she said, avoiding eye contact as she headed toward the stairs. "The clients were very impressed with our proposal." "That's great, honey. I'm proud of you." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but they had the desired effect. Amelia paused on the stairs, looking back at me with something that might have been guilt or might have been pity. "Danny," she said softly, "you know I love you, right?" "Of course I do," I replied. "I love you too." She nodded and continued upstairs, probably to shower away the evidence of her evening with Dean. I waited until I heard the water running, then quietly made my way to her purse, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. I'm not proud of going through my wife's personal belongings, but desperate times and all that. Besides, she'd forfeited her right to privacy when she started planning my financial destruction. Her purse was a designer bag that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month, filled with the usual assortment of makeup, receipts, and business cards. But tucked into a side pocket, I found something interesting: a second phone. It was a cheap prepaid model, the kind you could buy at any convenience store with cash and no questions asked. The kind people used when they didn't want their activities traced back to them. I powered it on, and my suspicions were confirmed. The text history was a goldmine of evidence. Months of messages between Amelia and Dean, ranging from mundane scheduling details to explicit descriptions of their activities. But more than that, there were discussions about their future plans, including detailed strategies for dissolving my business and maximizing Amelia's divorce settlement. "Once we get the Morrison-Hayes partnership established," read one message from Amelia, "we can use our combined client base to push coastal construction out of the waterfront projects. Danny won't know what hit him." "Perfect," Dean had replied. "My father's connections at City Hall can make sure they don't get any more municipal contracts. We'll have them bankrupted within a year." So it wasn't just adultery, it was conspiracy, pure and simple. They weren't content with just betraying me personally. They wanted to destroy everything I'd built professionally as well. I took photos of the most damaging messages with my own phone, then carefully returned the burner to its hiding place. The shower was still running upstairs, which gave me time to check Amelia's laptop. She'd left it open on the kitchen counter, probably figuring I was too simple-minded to be interested in her work. The screen showed her email inbox, and I quickly scanned through the recent messages. There it was. Correspondence with a divorce attorney named Patricia Wells, dated from 3 weeks ago. Amelia had already begun the process of ending our marriage, consulting about asset division and spousal support. According to the email chain, she was claiming that my business was worth significantly more than I'd ever told her, and she was seeking 50% of its value plus ongoing alimony. The water stopped upstairs. I quickly closed the laptop and returned to the couch, my mind racing with possibilities. Amelia appeared a few minutes later in her bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel. She looked relaxed and satisfied, like someone who'd just had a very good evening. "I'm exhausted," she announced. "I think I'll go straight to bed." "Sleep well," I said. "I'll be up in a few minutes." But I didn't go to bed. Instead, I waited until I heard her breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep, then crept back downstairs to my home office. I had work to do. My office was a converted bedroom that served as both my business headquarters and personal workshop. The walls were covered with project photos, building permits, and architectural drawings from my previous career. My desk was an old drafting table I'd salvaged from a demolished office building, surrounded by the tools of both my trades, construction equipment and design software. I fired up my computer and began researching. Patricia Wells, the divorce attorney, had an impressive website full of testimonials from satisfied clients who'd gotten everything they deserved in their divorce settlements. She specialized in what she called high-asset divorces, which apparently meant taking successful men for everything they were worth. Dean Morrison was easier to research. His family owned Morrison Development, one of the largest real estate companies in the state. He'd grown up wealthy, attended private schools, and had never worked a day of honest labor in his life. His social media profiles were full of photos from expensive restaurants, exotic vacations, and charity events where rich people congratulated themselves for their generosity. But the most interesting thing I found was a news article from 2 years ago about Morrison Development being investigated for bid rigging on municipal contracts. The investigation had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the article mentioned that several city officials had received campaign contributions from the Morrison family around the same time. So Dean's plan to use his father's connections to destroy my business wasn't just talk. The Morrison family had a history of using their influence to eliminate competition. I spent the next 2 hours building a comprehensive file on both Dean and Patricia Wells. Social media profiles, business relationships, professional histories, financial records that were publicly available. By the time I was finished, I had a clear picture of exactly who I was dealing with. Amelia thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers, but she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd underestimated her opponent. I might not have gone to private schools or grown up with family money, but I'd spent 15 years in construction, and construction was all about strategy. You had to plan every move, anticipate every problem, and always have a backup plan. My backup plan was about to become my primary strategy. I opened a new document on my computer and began typing. If Amelia wanted to play games with lawyers and financial settlements, I was happy to oblige. But this game was going to have rules she hadn't expected, and a winner she definitely hadn't planned on. By the time I finally went to bed, it was nearly 3 a.m. Amelia was sleeping peacefully beside me, probably dreaming about her new life with Dean and all the money she was going to take from me. She had no idea that her dreams were about to become nightmares. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm and lay in bed listening to Amelia's steady breathing. She looked peaceful in sleep, almost innocent. It was hard to reconcile this woman with the calculating schemer I'd discovered her to be. But that was the thing about betrayal. It changed everything, including how you saw the past. All those late nights at the office, all those weekend conferences, all those times she'd seemed distant or distracted suddenly made sense in a new and terrible context. I got up quietly and went through my morning routine, trying to act normal while my mind worked through the details of what I was about to do. Amelia stirred as I was getting dressed for work. "Morning," she mumbled, still half asleep. "Morning, beautiful," I replied, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Sleep well?" What time is it?" "Early. Go back to sleep. I'll see you tonight." She was already drifting off again as I left the room. Part of me felt guilty about what I was planning, but I pushed that feeling aside. She'd made her choice when she decided to betray me. Now she'd have to live with the consequences. My first stop was Rick's house, a modest ranch-style place about 10 minutes from the construction site. Rick was in his garage tinkering with his motorcycle when I pulled up. "You're early," he said, looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. "I need a favor," I said. "A big one." Rick wiped his hands on a shop rag and gave me his full attention. "What kind of favor?" "I need you to make some phone calls, spread some information around." "What kind of information?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken of Amelia's text messages. Rick's expression darkened as he read through them. "Jesus, Danny, this is worse than I thought." "It gets worse," I said, and filled him in on the divorce attorney and Dean's plan to destroy my business. "Those bastards," Rick muttered. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to call everyone we know in the construction business. Contractors, suppliers, city officials, anyone who might be interested in knowing that Morrison Development is planning to use dirty tactics to eliminate competition. You want me to start a whisper campaign. I want you to tell the truth. Let people draw their own conclusions." Rick grinned, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I can do that. What else?" "I need you to reach out to some of our former clients, the ones who were happy with our work. Let them know that there might be some rumors floating around about coastal construction, and that they shouldn't believe everything they hear. Preemptive damage control." "Exactly. And Rick, make sure you mention that any rumors probably come from people who have a financial interest in seeing us fail." Rick nodded slowly. "You're playing this smart, Danny. Hit them before they can hit you. That's the plan. Can you handle the phone calls this morning?" "Consider it done." "What are you going to be doing?" "I have some visits to make." My first stop was the office of Patricia Wells, attorney at law. Her practice was located in a gleaming downtown office building, the kind of place where parking cost more per hour than most people made in a day. The reception area was designed to impress, with expensive furniture, original artwork, and a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Everything about the place screamed success and exclusivity. "I'd like to speak with Miss Wells," I told the receptionist. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. My work clothes and calloused hands clearly marked me as someone who didn't belong in their upscale world. "No, but I think she'll want to see me. Tell her it's about Amelia Hayes." The receptionist made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones. A few minutes later, a woman emerged from the back offices. Patricia Wells was in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp-eyed look that suggested she could spot weakness from across a room. "Mr. Hayes, I presume?" she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia Wells. How can I help you? I understand my wife has been consulting with you about a divorce." Her expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "I'm afraid I can't discuss confidential client matters." "Of course not," I said. "But I thought you might be interested to know that I'm aware of my wife's plans, and I'm prepared to make this process as simple as possible for everyone involved." Now I had her attention. Divorce attorneys loved easy cases, especially ones involving significant assets. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office," she said. Her office was even more impressive than the reception area, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor and enough legal books to stock a small library. She gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her massive desk. "What did you have in mind, Mr. Hayes?" she asked. "I'm a reasonable man, Ms. Wells. I understand that marriages sometimes don't work out, and I'm not interested in making this more difficult than it needs to be. But I'm interested in making sure that everything is handled fairly and legally. Of course. Which is why I wanted to make sure you had all the relevant information about our financial situation before proceeding." I pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning, filled with financial documents, business records, and tax returns. Everything was legitimate and accurate, but it painted a very different picture of my net worth than what Amelia had apparently told her attorney. Patricia Wells reviewed the documents with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. As she read, her expression grew increasingly troubled. "This is quite different from what I understood about your financial situation," she said finally. "I'm sure it is. My wife has never been particularly interested in the business side of things. She may have some misconceptions about what the company is actually worth. These numbers suggest that Coastal Construction has significant debt obligations and relatively modest liquid assets." "That's correct. Construction is a capital-intensive business. Most of our value is tied up in equipment, contracts, and accounts receivable. And as you can see from the loan documents, much of that is leveraged. What I didn't mention was that I'd spent the early morning hours moving money around, converting liquid assets into equipment purchases, and prepaying various business expenses. Everything I'd done was legal and legitimate, but it had the effect of making my business look much less profitable than Amelia believed." "I see," Patricia Wells said, clearly recalculating her potential fee. "Well, this certainly changes things." "I thought it might. I also wanted to make sure you were aware that there may be some complications regarding the dissolution of the marriage." "What kind of complications?" I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the text messages I'd photographed. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she read. "I'm not a lawyer," I said, "but it seems to me that planning to destroy someone's business as part of a divorce strategy might raise some ethical questions." Patricia Wells set down my phone and leaned back in her chair. She was clearly doing some rapid calculations, weighing the potential risks and rewards of continuing to represent Amelia. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, "I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the nature of this case. Perhaps it would be best if your wife and I had another conversation before proceeding." "That sounds very reasonable," I said, standing up. "I appreciate your time, Ms. Wells." As I left her office, I could see her reaching for her phone. She'd be calling Amelia within minutes, and that conversation was going to be very interesting. My next stop was Morrison Development, located in a glass tower that dominated the downtown skyline. Unlike Patricia Wells's office, this place was designed to intimidate rather than impress. Everything was cold, modern, and expensive, from the marble floors to the abstract sculptures that probably cost more than most people's houses. Getting to see Dean was more complicated than seeing his attorney. I had to go through 2 receptionists and a secretary, each of whom looked at me with increasing suspicion. But eventually, curiosity won out, and I was escorted to a conference room on the 32nd floor. Dean Morrison entered the room 5 minutes later, looking every inch the privileged rich boy he was. Expensive suit, perfect hair, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 30s, with the soft look of someone who'd never done physical labor. "Mr. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" I shook his hand, noting the soft palm and manicured nails. "I wanted to discuss some business matters with you, specifically the Riverside Development Project." His expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around his eyes. "What about it?" "I understand that Morrison Hayes Architecture is bidding on the design contract." "Morrison Hayes?" He tried to look confused, but he wasn't a good enough actor to pull it off. "Your partnership with my wife. I assume you'll be announcing it officially soon." Now he looked genuinely surprised. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." I pulled out my phone and showed him some of the text messages. His face went pale as he read. "I see you and Amelia have been making some interesting plans," I said, "both personal and professional." Dean sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. "Look, Mr. Hayes, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "Has there?" "Because it seems pretty clear to me. You and my wife are having an affair, planning to destroy my business, and counting on me being too stupid to figure it out." "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Dean was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to figure out how much I knew and how much damage control he needed to do. "Your wife and I have developed feelings for each other," he said finally. "But we never intended for anyone to get hurt. Except for me, apparently. We were trying to find a way to handle this that would be fair to everyone. By bankrupting me and stealing my clients? That was never the plan." "Really?" "Because I have text messages that suggest otherwise." Dean's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression grew even more troubled. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, stepping out of the conference room. I could hear him talking in hushed, urgent tones in the hallway. When he returned, he looked like a man who'd just received very bad news. "That was Patricia Wells," he said. "She's withdrawing as Amelia's attorney." "Is she?" "That's unfortunate. Mr. Hayes, what do you want?" "I want you to stay away from my wife, stay away from my business, and find yourself a new hobby. Preferably one that doesn't involve destroying other people's lives." "And if I don't?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor where my construction crews were working on projects that Dean wanted to steal from me. "Then you'll find out what happens when you underestimate a simple-minded construction worker," I said. "And trust me, you won't enjoy the lesson." I left Dean sitting in that conference room, staring at his phone, and probably wondering how his perfect plan had fallen apart so quickly. But this was just the beginning. I'd fired the first shots in what was going to be a very interesting war. By the time I got back to the construction site, Rick was waiting for me with a grin that could have powered the entire waterfront. "How'd the phone calls go?" I asked. "Better than expected," he said. "Turns out a lot of people have been wondering about Morrison Development's business practices. And now they're very interested in making sure that honest contractors like us don't get pushed around by rich boys with connections." "Good. What else?" "I also called that reporter from the Harbor News, the one who wrote that article about the bid rigging investigation. She's very interested in talking to you." "Perfect. Set up a meeting." "Danny," Rick said, his expression growing serious, "are you sure you want to go this far? Once you start down this road, there's no going back. I thought about Amelia lying next to me in bed, planning my destruction while I slept beside her. I thought about Dean in his expensive suit, counting on his family's money and connections to crush everything I'd built. I thought about all the honest, hard-working people who depended on coastal construction for their livelihoods. They started this war, I said. I'm just going to finish it. That evening, I came home to find Amelia pacing around our living room like a caged animal. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was clutching her phone like a lifeline. "We need to talk," she said the moment I walked through the door. "Sure," I said, settling into my usual chair. "What's on your mind?" "Patricia Wells called me today. She's no longer going to represent me." "That's too bad." She seemed competent. Amelia stared at me, clearly trying to figure out how much I knew. "She said you came to see her." "I did." I thought it was important that she had accurate information about our financial situation. "What kind of information?" I pulled out the same folder I'd shown Patricia Wells and set it on the coffee table between us. "The real numbers, Amelia. Not the fantasy version you apparently gave her." She opened the folder and began reading through the documents, her expression growing more troubled with each page. "This can't be right," she said finally. "The business is worth much more than this." "Is it? Based on what?" "Based on... you're always talking about how well things are going. Things are going well. We're busy, we're profitable, and we're growing. But that doesn't mean we're sitting on a pile of cash. Most of our value is tied up in equipment and contracts. It wasn't technically a lie. Construction businesses were notoriously cash poor, even successful ones. What I didn't mention was that I'd spent the past day restructuring things to make the situation look even more dramatic than it actually was. But what about the house? What about our savings? The house has a mortgage, a big one, and our savings. I gestured to the financial statements. It's all there in black and white. Amelia sank onto the couch, looking defeated. "This changes everything." "Does it?" "I thought you loved me for who I am, not for what I'm worth." She looked up at me sharply, and for a moment I saw something like guilt in her eyes, but it passed quickly, replaced by anger. "Don't try to make this about love, Danny. You know this marriage hasn't been working for a long time." "Do I?" "Because I thought things were fine until I found out about Dean." The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that had just gone off. Amelia's face went white, then red, then white again. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of her text messages. She stared at the screen in horror, watching months of careful deception crumble in real time. "You went through my phone? Your burner phone, the one you use for communicating with your lover." "Danny, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I'd love to hear how you explain planning to destroy my business as part of your divorce strategy." Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. These weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of frustration at being caught. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she said. "How was it supposed to happen? You and Dean were going to bankrupt me, take half of whatever was left, and ride off into the sunset together? We never meant to hurt you." "Bullshit, Amelia. You meant to destroy me. The only thing you didn't mean was for me to find out about it." She was crying harder now, mascara running down her cheeks in dark streams. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to pack your things and get out of my house." "This is my house, too." "Actually, it's not. Check the deed. I bought this place before we got married, and I never added your name to the title." Her expression shifted from sorrow to anger to something approaching panic. "You can't just throw me out." "I'm not throwing you out. I'm asking you to leave. You can go stay with Dean. I'm sure he'll be happy to comfort you. Dean and it's complicated. I bet it is, especially now that his plan to steal my clients has fallen apart." "What do you mean?" "I mean that everyone in the construction business now knows about Morrison Development's little scheme. Amazing how fast word travels in a small industry." Amelia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her face crumpled. "It's Dean. He wants to see me." "Then you should go." "Danny, please. Can't we work this out? Can't we try counseling or something?" "You should have thought about that before you started planning my destruction." She stood up slowly, like an old woman. I'll need some time to pack. Take all the time you need. I'll be staying at Rick's tonight. Where will I go? That's not my problem anymore. I left her standing in our living room, surrounded by the wreckage of 12 years of marriage and whatever dreams she'd had about her future with Dean. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part felt something I'd never experienced before: the cold satisfaction of justice served. Rick's house was a refuge from the chaos my life had become. He lived alone since his divorce, and his place reflected the priorities of a man who'd learned to value simple pleasures: good beer, comfortable furniture, and a garage full of tools and projects. "How'd it go?" he asked as I settled into his recliner with a beer. "About as well as you'd expect." "She's packing her things." "And Dean?" "Probably panicking. His grand plan to take over the waterfront construction market just got a lot more complicated." Rick's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a few minutes, then hung up with a grin. That was Mike Santos from Santos Electrical. He says Morrison Development just lost the electrical contract for the Harbor View project. Seems the developer heard some rumors about their business practices and decided to go with a different firm. That was fast. Word travels fast when it's interesting enough. And apparently, the story of a rich boy trying to crush the competition with daddy's money is very interesting to a lot of people. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This isn't over," it read. "You have no idea who you're messing with." I showed the message to Rick, who laughed. "Looks like Dean's not taking this well." "Good. I want him scared." "What's your next move?" I thought about it for a moment. Amelia and Dean were both reeling from the day's revelations, but they weren't finished yet. Desperate people did desperate things, and I needed to be prepared for whatever they might try next. "I think it's time to go public," I said. "Public how?" "Remember that reporter you mentioned? Sarah Chen from the Harbor News?" "Yeah, what about her?" "Set up that meeting. It's time the whole city knew what Morrison Development and their friends have been up to." Rick nodded approvingly. "You're really going to burn it all down, aren't you?" "They started the fire, Rick. I'm just making sure it spreads." The next morning, I met Sarah Chen at a coffee shop downtown, a few blocks from Morrison Development's gleaming tower. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her late 20s, with the eager look of a reporter who'd found a story worth telling. "Mr. Hayes," she said, shaking my hand. "Rick tells me you have some interesting information about Morrison Development." "I do. But before we start, I want to make sure you understand that everything I'm going to tell you is documented and verifiable. I wouldn't have it any other way." I spent the next hour walking her through the entire story. Amelia's affair with Dean, their plan to destroy my business, the text messages, the divorce attorney, everything. Sarah took notes furiously, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "This is quite a story," she said when I finished. "But I have to ask, why are you coming to me with this? Why not just handle it privately?" "Because it's not just about me," I said. "Morrison Development has been using their influence to manipulate city contracts and eliminate competition for years. This is just the latest example. The public has a right to know how business is really done in this city." "And you're willing to go on the record with all of this?" "Absolutely. I have nothing to hide." Sarah closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. "I'll need to verify everything you've told me, interview other sources, get comment from Morrison Development. It'll take a few days." "Take all the time you need." The truth isn't going anywhere. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of momentum building. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no stopping them. Amelia and Dean had wanted to play hardball. Now they were going to learn what that actually meant. My phone rang as I was walking back to my truck. It was Amelia. "Danny, we need to talk. I thought we said everything that needed to be said last night. Please, Dean and things aren't going well. I think I made a mistake." "You think? Can we meet somewhere?" "Just to talk?" "There's nothing to talk about, Amelia. You made your choice." But what if I chose wrong? What if there's still a chance for us? I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. There was a chance for us, Amelia. Right up until the moment you decided to betray me. Now there's just consequences. I hung up and drove back to the construction site, where my crew was working on the foundation for a new office building. Honest work, done by honest people, building something that would last. It was a good reminder of what really mattered in life. Rick met me at the site with news that made my day even better. Morrison Development just lost another contract, he said. The city council voted to award the new municipal complex project to Harrison and Associates instead. Any particular reason? Officially? Harrison had a better bid. Unofficially? Word is that some council members had concerns about Morrison's business practices. The dominoes were falling faster than I'd expected. By the time Sarah Chen's article was published, there might not be much left of Dean's grand plans. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. 3 days later, Sarah Chen's article hit the front page of the Harbor News like a bombshell. The headline read, "Local development firm accused of conspiracy and market manipulation." Below, it was a photo of Morrison Development's gleaming tower, looking somehow less impressive in black and white. The article was everything I'd hoped for and more. Sarah had done her homework, interviewing multiple sources, verifying documents, and presenting a comprehensive picture of corruption that went far beyond just my personal situation. She'd uncovered a pattern of behavior that stretched back years: bid rigging, influence peddling, and the systematic elimination of competition through political connections and financial pressure. The story about Amelia and Dean's affair was mentioned, but only as context for the larger conspiracy. Sarah had focused on the business implications rather than the personal drama, which made the article more credible and harder to dismiss as a vindictive hit piece. My phone started ringing at 6 in the morning and didn't stop. Reporters, competitors, clients, city officials, everyone wanted to know more about the story that was already spreading beyond the local paper to regional and even national news outlets. But the call I was waiting for came at 10:30. It was Amelia, and she was crying. "Danny, you have to stop this," she sobbed into the phone. "They fired me. Dean won't return my calls. Everyone thinks I'm some kind of criminal." "Are you? What? Are you a criminal, Amelia?" "Because according to the text messages you sent, you were planning to use insider information and political connections to destroy a legitimate business. In some jurisdictions, that's called conspiracy. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Please, Danny, I'm begging you, call off your dogs." "My dogs? You mean the reporters who are doing their job? The city officials who are asking legitimate questions about corruption? The business community that's finally learning the truth about how Morrison Development operates? I have nowhere to go. No job, no money, no friends. Dean says it's too dangerous for us to be seen together right now." Sounds like Dean's showing his true colors. I made a mistake, okay? I admit it. But does that mean my whole life has to be destroyed? It was a fair question, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the months of lies, the secret planning, the casual contempt in her voice when she'd called me simple-minded. You didn't just make a mistake, Amelia. You made a choice, a series of choices. And now you get to live with them. What am I supposed to do? I don't know. Figure it out. You're a smart woman with a college degree and years of professional experience. I'm sure you'll think of something. Danny, please. I hung up. Rick found me an hour later, sitting in my office and staring at the harbor through the window. The water was gray and choppy, matching my mood. You okay? He asked. I think so. It's just... I never thought it would feel like this. Like what? Like winning and losing at the same time. Rick sat down in the chair across from my desk. You want to know what I think? Sure. I think you did what you had to do. They came after you, your business, your livelihood. You defended yourself. There's no shame in that. But maybe it's time to think about what comes next. You've made your point. The whole city knows what kind of people they are. Morrison Development is finished, at least as a major player. Dean's probably going to have to leave town. Amelia's career is over. You won. So now you have to decide what kind of man you want to be going forward. The kind who keeps kicking people when they're down, or the kind who moves on and builds something better. It was good advice, but I wasn't sure I was ready to take it. There was still too much anger, too much hurt, too much desire to see justice fully served. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. Follow-up story running tomorrow. City Council calling for investigation into all Morrison Development contracts. This is big, Danny. It was big. Bigger than I'd expected when I started down this road. What had begun as personal revenge was turning into a citywide scandal that could reshape the entire local business landscape. Another text, this one from an unknown number. You destroyed my family. I hope you're proud of yourself. I assumed it was from Dean, though I couldn't be sure. Either way, the message struck me as ironic. I hadn't destroyed anyone's family. I'd simply exposed the truth about what they'd been doing. If that destroyed them, it was because their lives were built on lies in the first place. But Rick's words kept echoing in my mind. What kind of man did I want to be going forward? That evening, I drove past our old house. My house, technically, though it felt strange to think of it that way. Amelia's car was gone, and the windows were dark. She'd apparently found somewhere else to stay, at least temporarily. I parked in the driveway and walked through the empty rooms, seeing 12 years of marriage in the furniture and photographs and accumulated possessions of a shared life. It should have felt sad, but mostly it just felt hollow. In the bedroom, I found a note on the nightstand. Danny, I'm sorry. For everything. I know you probably don't believe me, but I did love you once. Maybe I still do, in my own broken way. I hope someday you can forgive me, even if you can't forget. I read the note twice, then crumpled it up and threw it away. Too little, too late. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. Mr. Hayes, this is Thomas Morrison, Dean's father. The patriarch of Morrison Development and one of the most powerful men in the city. I'd never spoken to him before, but I'd seen his picture in the paper countless times over the years. What can I do for you, Mr. Morrison? I think we need to meet. Do we? My son made some poor choices, Mr. Hayes. But destroying an entire company and putting hundreds of people out of work seems like an extreme response. Your son tried to destroy my company and put my people out of work. I just beat him to the punch. Perhaps we could discuss this in person. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. What kind of offer? The kind that could make you a wealthy man. Wealthy enough to forget about past grievances and move on with your life. I almost laughed. Even now, facing the complete collapse of his business empire, Thomas Morrison thought he could solve everything with money. I'm not interested in your money, Mr. Morrison. Everyone's interested in money, Mr. Hayes. It's just a matter of finding the right amount. You're wrong about that. Some things can't be bought. Such as justice, integrity, the satisfaction of watching corrupt people face consequences for their actions. There was a long pause. When Thomas Morrison spoke again, his voice had lost its conciliatory tone. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hayes. My family has been part of this community for 3 generations. We have resources, connections, influence. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's not over. It's just getting started. I hung up and immediately called Sarah Chen. Sarah? It's Danny Hayes. I just got a very interesting phone call from Thomas Morrison. Are you interested in hearing about it? Absolutely. Can you meet me in an hour? I'll be there. As I drove back into town, I realized that Rick had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't about deciding what kind of man I wanted to be going forward. I'd already made that decision the night I discovered Amelia's betrayal. I was the kind of man who finished what he started. The final chapter of this story was about to be written, and I was going to make sure it ended exactly the way it should. 6 months later, I was sitting in my expanded office, looking out at a harbor that had changed dramatically since that night I'd overheard Amelia's phone call. Morrison Development was gone, their assets sold off to pay creditors and legal fees. Thomas Morrison had been indicted on corruption charges, and Dean had left town under circumstances that were the subject of considerable local gossip. The city council had implemented new oversight procedures for municipal contracts, and several officials who'd been too cozy with the Morrison family had either resigned or been voted out of office. The Harbor News had won a state journalism award for Sarah Chen's investigative series, which had expanded far beyond the original story to expose a web of corruption that reached into every level of local government. Coastal construction had not only survived the attempted sabotage, but had thrived in the aftermath. With Morrison Development out of the picture, we'd been awarded several major contracts that had previously been locked up through political connections. I'd hired a dozen new employees and opened a second office across town. Amelia had left the city entirely, moving to Seattle where she'd apparently found work with a small firm that specialized in residential projects. We'd never finalized our divorce. She couldn't afford an attorney, and I was in no hurry to make things easier for her. Sometimes the best revenge was simply letting someone live with the consequences of their choices. Rick knocked on my office door, interrupting my thoughts. "You've got a visitor," he said. "Who is it?" "Someone you need to see." He stepped aside, and Dean Morrison walked into my office. He looked terrible. Thinner, older, wearing clothes that had seen better days. The arrogant rich boy was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned what failure actually felt like. "Hello, Danny," he said. "Dean, this is unexpected. I wanted to talk to you before I left town for good. I thought you'd already left. I came back to settle some final business. And to apologize." "Apologize?" "For everything. The affair, the business conspiracy, underestimating you. All of it." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "What do you want, Dean?" "Nothing. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm sorry for the pain I caused." "Are you? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" "Both, probably. But the sorry I got caught part doesn't make the other part less true." "What happened to you?" "I heard you left town months ago." "I did. Went to California, tried to start over. But it turns out that when your name is associated with a major corruption scandal, people in the architecture business tend to remember. I couldn't get work, couldn't get clients, couldn't even get interviews." "So you came back?" "My father's in prison, probably for the next 10 years. My mother's living in a retirement community in Florida, spending what's left of the family money. The company's gone, the reputation's gone, everything's gone. And you think that makes us even? No. I think it makes me someone who finally understands what I threw away when I decided to mess with your life." Dean sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited. He looked exhausted. "You want to know the funny thing?" he continued. "I actually admired you. Your work ethic, your integrity, the way you built something from nothing. I grew up with everything handed to me, and I never appreciated any of it. You had to fight for everything you got, and you still managed to be a better man than I ever was. If you admired me so much, why did you try to destroy me?" "Because Amelia made it seem like a game. Like we were smarter than you, more sophisticated, more deserving of success. She convinced me that you were holding her back, that you didn't appreciate what you had. And I wanted to believe her because it made what we were doing seem justified. And now I know that she was just as wrong about you as I was, maybe more wrong." We sat in silence for a few minutes, two men who'd been on opposite sides of a war that had left one victorious and the other completely defeated. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "Leave town." "For real this time." I've got a job offer in Portland, working for a small firm that does strip mall designs. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and they're willing to give me a chance despite everything that's happened. That's something, I guess. It's more than I deserve. Dean stood up. I won't bother you again, Danny. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm sorry for all of it. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. For what it's worth, I think you handled this exactly right. You could have just beaten the hell out of me and called it even. Instead, you made sure that everyone learned the truth about what kind of people we really were. That took more courage and more integrity than I've ever shown in my entire life. After he left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, Dean Morrison had been a wealthy, successful architect with a bright future and unlimited possibilities. Now he was a broken man, grateful for the chance to design strip malls in Portland. 6 months ago, I'd been a trusting husband who thought his biggest problem was a leaking transmission. Now I was a successful businessman who'd learned that sometimes the best way to build something new was to tear down everything that came before it. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. New story running tomorrow. City announces major waterfront development project. Guess who got the construction contract? I smiled and looked out at the harbor, where crews were already working on the preliminary site preparation for what would be the largest construction project in the city's history. Coastal construction had come a long way from that night when I'd lain under my truck, listening to my wife plan my destruction. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't getting even. Sometimes it was getting ahead. Rick appeared in my doorway again. So, how'd that go? Better than I expected. I think Dean Morrison finally learned what accountability looks like. And how does that make you feel? Satisfied, complete, ready to move on. Good. Because I just got a call from the mayor's office. They want to discuss the waterfront project timeline. Tell them I'll be right there. As I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, I caught my reflection in the office window. I looked like a man who'd been through hell and come out stronger on the other side. The simple-minded construction worker was gone, replaced by someone who understood that success wasn't just about building things up. Sometimes it was about tearing down the obstacles that stood in your way. Amelia and Dean had taught me that lesson, though probably not in the way they'd intended. They'd underestimated me, betrayed me, and tried to destroy everything I'd worked for. In return, I'd shown them what real ambition looked like. The harbor stretched out before me, full of possibilities and new projects. The past was buried in the ashes of Morrison development and a failed marriage. The future was whatever I decided to build next, and I was just getting started.